Trying to keep their playoff hopes alive, the Cincinnati Bengals get some good injury news ahead of Saturday's game against the Broncos. Let's break it down.
You are Locked On Bengals, your daily Cincinnati Bengals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What up, Bengals fans, and welcome to another episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. I'm your host, Jake Liscow. He's your host, James Rapien. We are Locked On Bengals on the Locked On Podcast Network, covering your team every day on YouTube and everywhere you get your podcast. So if you're new to the show, you can hit that subscribe button to make sure you don't miss an episode. Hope you had a great Christmas, a great start to your holiday season for all the everydayers and all of you who make us your first listen. Thanks for making Locked On Bengals part of your routine. Today's episode is sponsored by Gametime, where you can save $20 on your first purchase of tickets with promo code Locked On NFL. James, we dive into our last look at this Broncos-Bengals game coming up on Saturday. The Bengals didn't get a whole lot of help outside of the building on Wednesday, but regardless, sounds like good news on the injury front, especially for Orlando Brown Jr., Amarius Mims. Those two guys apparently going to be good to go, according to Zach Taylor. And the question from there becomes, how good to go? How healthy will they be when they take the field on Saturday?
Yeah, I think that's certainly where my mind is with both of these guys. It's like, all right, well, Orlando Brown Jr. is going to start. Amarius Mims is going to start. Will they be able to finish? Orlando Brown Jr. has started and finished one game over the past 8 weeks or so. It might be 9. And it was that December 1st game against the Steelers where he was clearly not himself. And so how close will Orlando be to his normal self? Zach Taylor, I talked to him about an hour ago, said he looks great. And that's exactly what I would say if I was playing a veteran in a must-win scenario. I will say this. I could confidently say Orlando is not 100%. And so my question is, well, what is he? Is he 60? Probably around the range of what he was against Pittsburgh on December 1st. Or is he 80? He's 80. He's without a doubt your best option. And you want him on the field. 60, and it's like, do you want to put him through that? Even if he's still might be better than what you have. Do you want to put him through that again? And for what? And so that's where I'm at with him. I do think, though, having him and Amarius is going to be less than 100% with that ankle, and now his hand injury that he's going to have to potentially play. I don't know if he's going to play with the club or what he's going to have on it, but I think he's going to have something on it. And so how are these guys and how do they hold up from a health standpoint against a pretty physical and talented Broncos front? I think that's a big question.
Yeah, and the level at which those guys are able to play, like I said, the capacity, the percentage, whatever you want to call it, that number is going to be so critical in this game because we've seen the pressure amp up in Orlando Brown's absence. And when Amarius Mims had to leave the game last week, it got even worse. And those guys at either end could provide you with a great deal of stability. Cody Ford sliding back in at left guard, according to Zach Taylor. Cordell Volson will go back to the bench, at least to start the game. Like you said, depending on what happens over the course of the game. But if those guys can approximate their normal form, especially in pass protection, then the offensive line should perform better. But the last time we saw Orlando Brown trying to play through this injury, it wasn't good. And he, that level of Orlando is not going to make you a whole lot better, especially when you're talking about Nick Bonito on the other side being the most threatening of the Denver edge rushers and the kind of speed and athleticism, the way that he attacks in terms of the pass rush. That's already not a great matchup for Orlando Brown, but if he can't move very well, that matchup gets a little bit worse just stylistically. And one of the ways Orlando deals with that kind of speed rusher is the get off and the ability to get into those pass sets and time up the snap. So in that sense, it's great that the Bengals are at home for this game for Orlando timing up the snap as he's done all year. But that's certainly a focus, I think, and health in general is going to be a focus. You talk about the health disparity between the Cincinnati Bengals and the Denver Broncos, but yeah, the question that we will not have an answer to most likely, and if we do, we'll let you know as best we can, is just how healthy those guys are going to be, because that range of outcomes something we haven't talked about for a while, a range of outcomes, right? For those guys and the level at which they can play will be such a variable on Saturday.
Yeah, and I think I would trend towards Orlando being in a better situation. There's a reason why. I mean, he finished the game against the Steelers. There's a reason why they were like, all right, let's dial it back now. And in this coaching staff, I think they were aware of where they were, how valuable in organization, how valuable Orlando is. And the reason they didn't put him on IR is it's like, hey, get better. And then if we're playing a meaningful game down the stretch, then hopefully we can get you back out there. And so it times out well from that perspective. I think that was their plan. Literally December 2nd, they're like, yeah, you're not playing this week. And I don't know if they told him, he told them, whatever the case is, but they came to that conclusion. And it wasn't because he suffered a setback. He finished the game. It's just because everyone knew that he was far less than 100%. So hopefully what we see that, and we can see the best left tackle play we've seen since he got hurt initially in October. That would be great. The other element here that I think is just intriguing is, all right, so Orlando Brown Jr. at left tackle, Cody Ford moves into left guard, Cordell Volson back to the bench, as you mentioned. How does that look if Orlando is, let's say 85%? Let's go optimistic here. Let's say 85% of Orlando Brown Jr. Is that an upgrade? Is Ford better than Volson? We'll see. But I am intrigued, especially against a good front. You mentioned Benito. I feel like Benito's wrecked multiple games. He had that pick six on the trick play a couple of weeks ago where it's like, oh my God, like we haven't got the Pat Surtain yet. Like they have a lot of guys that you have to count for on this defense that are really talented.
Yeah, I don't know if everyone caught the crossover this week, what with the holidays and everything. Wouldn't blame you if you missed that one. But if you did, you missed hearing that Nick Benito apparently is third in the Defensive Player of the Year odds right now, which got me. I mean, I wouldn't have counted on that. Like I knew he was good. I knew he was having a good year. But third in DPOY odds, that's a lot. And Patrick Surtain, as you mentioned, is second right now in that race. So a couple of guys that are in contention for big awards on that Denver side of the ball. And the other thing that I wanted to just highlight really quick here while we're talking about the positive injury news for the Bengals, the comparison of injuries between these teams is wild. I think Denver might be the healthiest team in the NFL at this point in week 17. They have 3 total guys on injured reserve. One of them has been designated for return, so they're going to get him back. So they'll be left with 2 guys on injured reserve. Look at their practice report this week, their injury report so far this week. And we don't have Thursdays yet at the time of recording, but they're 2 days. They have 4 guys that were all full participants on those injury reports. Meanwhile, the Bengals have 13 guys on IR and have a bunch of guys that are limited and are missing practice with various bumps and bruises and illnesses. And it's not to say that any of this is an excuse. It's just wild to see the difference. You got 2 guys on IR for one team, 13 for the other team. And the level of cleanliness on the injury report for the Broncos compared to the Bengals, just pretty crazy for this point in the year. And you add on to that Denver with a little bit of extra rest because that game moved to Thursday night. It's just a huge disparity in terms of the health of these teams, which is noteworthy, I guess. Interesting to point out, certainly observable.
Yeah, for sure. It's noteworthy because it's this time of year and the Bengals put themselves in this backs against the wall type of position where you can't say, oh, well, injuries. No, that's why you got to give yourself a margin for error by winning some of those games that you should have won, that you didn't win. Now you're 7-8 and you're hoping to find a way to beat a really good Denver team. I mean, I think that this Denver team is good. They have some flaws, but when you think of teams that can match up with the Bengals, you think of pass rush, you think of corners. And, they have one of the best corners, arguably the best corner, a high-end pass rush. And so throw in the fact that they're well coached, they're playing for their playoff lives as well. It should be a heck of a game. And so the injury part of it matters. When you have games like this where it's like can be close and go either way, of course, that injury disparity, especially when we're talking about 2 guys that are going to start for the Bengals, play a key role at less than 100% in Brown and Mims. And a lot of guys are that way now, for sure, no doubt. But that certainly matters.
And Joe Burrow even limited. Not that he's not going to play, but he's been limited the last couple of weeks as he's still managing the knee. issue that he's had. Let's talk a little bit more about the feel of this game and some of those factors, because Denver is a good team. The Bengals haven't played a team, in my opinion, of Denver's quality for quite a while at this point, at least 4 weeks. So we'll talk a little bit more about some of the specifics of the game as we dive into the matchups coming up next.
Today's show is brought to you by Gametime. Gametime is the app you should download right now. Let's say you want to watch Bengals Broncos right here at Paycor Stadium where I am. Gametime is the app that's going to get you there super convenient and get you there for less. I love Gametime because they have the lowest price guarantee. They'll give you the lowest price on your seats, or Gametime will credit you 110% of the difference. They have panoramic seat views from your seat in the app, so you see exactly what it's going to look like before you buy your tickets. And the all-in pricing. Toggling this feature shows the total upfront, no surprise fees at checkout with Gametime. Those are just a few of the many, many reasons why you should download the Gametime app, whether you plan on going to Bengals, Broncos, or going to any live events in the near future. Gametime is the app you need. So download it, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL. Locked on NFL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? Gametime.
James, does this game have the feel of a game where, remember that stretch where Joe Burrow was saying, I got to play pretty near perfect or perfect? Does this game have that feel to you at all? Because it kind of has that feel to me a little bit.
It does if the Bengals defense reverts back to their, we're playing a decent team, we're not going to be able to get off the field. Right? I look back to, and it feels like ages ago. For full disclosure, we're recording this on December 26th. So 25 days ago, I was at Jermaine Pratt's locker following the 44-38 loss to the Steelers. And he said, it's just a lot of quick game. Just quick game. He said, what missed tackles? And I haven't been able to get that out of my head because the Steelers offense stinks. And they had Pickens that day, George Pickens that day. And they haven't had, but they're not a good offense by any stretch. They're fine, but they've been playing the wrong running back. Najee Harris isn't as good as Jalen Warren. Like all of these things, their offensive line's okay. Russell Wilson's okay. And so it's like, yeah, if you're going to play like that, the last time we saw you play against an okay opponent, then yeah, Joe is going to have to be perfect. And a lot of that has to do with this defense. I think this Broncos defense is just so good. Because again, if you can cover and you can get heat on Burrow, and I still think they'll give Pat Surtain some help against Jamar. And if you're the Bengals, you have to find ways to still get, number one, the ball and move him around and all of those things. But you're going to need T and Andre and these guys to step up. There's a lot there. And so to your point, yeah, it's a tough ask for Joe Burrow, knowing stylistically the differences between their offense and the defense they're going up against. Can they do it? I'm certainly not dismissing that at all. I think the Bengals could certainly beat the Broncos on Saturday. But it is a tough opponent. It's a nice test. And it's a nice test for this defense because I still have my doubts. You still have your doubts. And even though they forced 9 turnovers in 2 weeks, we have plenty of doubts about them. And so it's up for them to go prove it. It's up for Lou Anarumo to go prove it. It's up for these guys that have a lot hanging in the balance over the next 2 weeks, regardless of the playoffs, to go out there and show that they deserve to be back or can be part of the solution, not the problem.
And if you're comparing them to the Steelers, which is not a one-to-one comparison, obviously, but like broad strokes, right? Decent team, the last solid team the Bengals played. The Pittsburgh Steelers scored 363 points this year. They've played 16 games. Through 15 games, the Broncos have scored 363 points this year. So the Broncos are a better offense, or have been a better offense this year. And of course, Pittsburgh Steelers had a quarterback change in there, have had a bit of a slide lately. They've lost 3 straight as their schedule is finally featuring real teams as the season draws to a close, which was always going to be the case. We knew that the Steelers schedule played out that way, but the Denver defense also giving up less points than the Steelers defense. And I know that the Steelers have played one more game, and maybe this changes. Maybe the Bengals go out there and put 50 on the Denver Broncos. But right now they've given up 47 less points with one less game than the Steelers. So even if the Bengals score 30, Denver's giving up less points than the Steelers. So just from like a broad strokes perspective, from a results perspective, not considering quality of opponent or any of these things, there's a solid football team here. The Bengals haven't played a solid football team for 4 weeks, and Denver isn't perfect, right? But
Dallas is solid. Dallas is solid. They've won 4 or 5, or 5 or 6.
I know. It's still Cooper Rush.
You love Cooper Rush. What are you talking about?
I mean, he was a huge reason that Dallas lost that game. I mean, Dallas also could have won the game if they don't flub the block punt. So
no doubt.
Regardless, the point I'm trying to make here is
I know.
This is a solid football team top to bottom. There's a good offensive line here. There's solid skill players. There's a deep running back stable if Sean Payton is able to actually stick with the run, which is another point that we talked about in the crossover. And as you mentioned on the defense, from front to back, deep defensive line unit up front that will rotate and cause the Bengals problems from, I think, all 5 spots at times throughout this game. They're all solid plus players, and a solid secondary where they looks like are getting Riley Moss back, which didn't expect Riley Moss to be an X factor, but was such a point during our crossover with Locked On Broncos that they're still going to pick on him, but that's a step up from what they've had as he returns from injury or looks to be in line to return from injury this week.
And that's why if you're the Bengals and it'll be the Jamar Triple Crown discussion, how many receptions, touchdowns, yards, all of those things. I get it. We'll be focused on that. But T. Higgins, you got to find a way to have another big game. And I feel like he's been playing well. That has to continue. Andre Yosavash played really well against the Browns. Had a really nice catch against Denzel Ward. Obviously had the touchdown as well. This is a good – you want to talk about things that are on the line. I've focused a lot on defense over the past week or two about guys that could prove themselves. If you're Andre – you look at these final 2 games and say, hey, I'm wide receiver 3. Like, it's mine. And you could say the same thing with Mike Gesicki, right? He could be that guy too. So they have guys that could step up. But you're going to need you're going to need to find matchups to exploit that don't necessarily involve 15 targets for Jamar Chase. You might get those, but I'm not expecting that necessarily this week. I'm sure he's going to get targeted plenty, but I just think that's the one matchup where Pat Surtain's probably following him. They're probably giving him some help. And so these other matchups out wide are certainly going to determine a lot, especially on the money downs, which Joe Burrow's been obviously huge in those moments in recent weeks.
And if they can stay ahead of the chains, all the better. Another challenge this week. The running game has looked okay for a few weeks now, but this is another good running defense. And when they've had the ability to lean on the run a little bit, the offense has looked much better. Unsurprisingly, it's not rocket science or anything there. When you can run the ball well and you also have Joe Burrow, T. Higgins, Jamar Chase, and the ancillary guys that we're talking about, it makes your life easier on offense, especially when we're talking about a pass rush that has been very effective, like the Denver Broncos pass rush has, and one of the better coverage units in all of football. So if you can allow yourself to be multidimensional and not allow Denver to just be like, okay, you're passing, we're going to try to disrupt your passing game. And the Bengals will be in that situation. That's the way they play football. But the effectiveness of the run game this week, as with previous weeks, this isn't anything new, could make the Bengals' lives and Joe Burrow's life a lot easier this week.
Yeah, to back up your point on Riley Moss real quick, and this backs up the running game element as well, if you can be effective running it. I just looked up Riley Moss, and one of the first articles is Broncos defensive performance without Riley Moss is shockingly bad. I didn't look at the numbers. I'll read the article later, but it's just like, holy cow. To roll with a headline like that is the point is he does matter for them. And I know that's what you guys talked about on the crossover a bit too. So yeah, I think Chase Brown, you could get him rolling a bit, get him to 1K, a second Chase with 1K on the field. That'd be nice. He's been great. We'll see if he could keep it up.
There's another side of the ball to talk about as well. There's the idea of what the Bengals can control, as Wednesday didn't go great in terms of things that you would want to see when you're rooting for the Bengals to sneak into the playoffs. We'll finish the show with those topics coming up next.
History economics, the great works of literature, the meaning of the U.S. Constitution. Did you study these things in school? Probably not. And even if you did, maybe it's time for a refresher. Time and technology have changed a lot of things, but they have not changed fundamental truths about the world and our place in it. Our sponsor, Hillsdale College, is offering more than 40 free, that's right, free online courses, including Constitution 101, the meaning and history of the Constitution, the Great American Story, the rise and fall of the Roman Republic, and much, much more. All of Hillsdale's courses are self-paced, so you can start whenever, tune in wherever. Plus, you can go deeper with readings, quizzes, discussions, or you just enjoy the lectures. Go right now to hillsdale.edu/lockedon to sign up. There's no cost. It's easy to get started. Again, that's hillsdale.edu/lockedon, hillsdale.edu/lockedon.
Let's talk about what this defense has in front of it, James. This is one of the better pass blocking offensive lines in the NFL. I've been saying that all week. Cortland Sutton, solid player. Bo Nix has had a solid rookie campaign, such that Joe Burrow has gone out of his way to praise him earlier in the season, not this week, but then was asked about it, of course, again this week. Devon Vele, I think is how that name is pronounced, a 7th-round pick out of Utah from this year's draft, 6'5". Yep. He's been wildly productive for a 7th-round pick at wide receiver for the Broncos. The Bengals, meanwhile, have feasted on some backup-level quarterbacks lately. Bo Nix appears to be a competent quarterback. He's not great. He's not putting up insane numbers, but he's athletic. He's been taking care of the football pretty well as a rookie. And so if the Cincinnati Bengals defense can put together another one of those solid performances like we've seen the last few weeks, then I'll be much less couched or caveat-y, that's not a word, but I'm making it one, with my praise of the Bengals if they can put together another good defensive performance. And there's some guys that obviously we've been talking about all year need to continue to play well down the stretch here for their future and for this year as well.
No doubt about it. I think you go on down the line, right? Like, so Joseph Osai, I expect him to play on Saturday. He's been dealing with an illness, but he's kind of shown a little bit. It's because he's trying to get another zero added onto that contract talks, right? He's playing for something. Lou Anarumo, I think it's fair to say he's coaching for his job. I think you have so many of these guys, young guys, that have flashed some. All right, we'll do it again against a better opponent, right? If you're Chris Jenkins, you had 2 sacks last week. McKinley Jackson has had some impact plays over the past few weeks. Let's see it this week. Miles Murphy, the pressure rate is up. People have mentioned that. All right, well, go get a strip sack this week, Miles. Go make a big play in a key moment on Saturday in a must-win game. So there are a lot of guys on defense that have a lot to prove. Cam Taylor-Britt, you've been affecting the game, impacting the game. Same thing. Geno Stone, an interception in 3 straight games. Can you make it 4? He's battling an illness, by the way, on Thursday. The Bengals expect him to be ready to go on Saturday. Make it 4 straight. There are so many of these guys that have started to flash. Jordan Battle, same thing. Mm-hmm. And so let's see it translate now. Because I do think that there is a scenario where Lou or some of these young guys, in the Lou one, there's a lot there. But some of these young guys can show that they're building blocks. Lou is coaching for his job, and probably outside looking in if I had to guess right now. But maybe he gets back inside the Bengals coaches club, as I say that in quotes, right? Long term, like finds a way to maintain his status as defensive coordinator. But you can't do it by beating up on the Titans and beating up on the Browns. You got to do it in a prime time, and that's what this is, Saturday night football, essentially. Game against the Broncos. They're playing for a lot. You're playing for a lot. Let's see it. And so I still can't get, I keep hearing Jermaine Pratt say, quick game, just a lot of quick game. What missed tackles? And, that's one of your captains. And so Jermaine Pratt, something to prove for sure that he should be around next season. So there are a lot of guys. I haven't mentioned him a lot, but he's certainly in that boat as well.
And just from a scheme perspective, outside of the individuals, what they're preparing for this week, agree with, I think, everything you said there. I didn't hear anything that I would add caveats to or object to.
Look at you. You don't want to debate about that?
Well, I didn't hear anything objectionable, but just from a scheme perspective, I'm just trying to transition topics here while acknowledging what you had to add to the conversation. This Denver team is one of the heaviest play action teams in the NFL.
Mm-hmm.
Bo Nix has the 5th most play action dropbacks in the NFL. And this is for a team that doesn't drop back and pass a ton with Bo Nix, right? They also have one of the highest screen rates in the NFL, 4th most screens in the NFL by a percentage basis for Bo Nix. 15% of Bo Nix dropbacks are play action or are screen dropbacks. And you add on to that 28% that are play action dropbacks. You're at what, 42%, almost 43%. One of those numbers I rounded down that I shouldn't have. Almost 43% of Bo Nix dropbacks are play action or a screen. That's a pretty heavy split of trying to scheme stuff up for your quarterback and putting a lot of strain on the second level, on safeties, to be in the right place, to fill gaps effectively in the screen game, on defensive linemen to retrace in the screen game. And they have to be ready for that. I don't think they've faced quite this level of scheming it up for a few weeks now either.
Quick game. Can't stop it. Can't stop the quick game. No, I think that makes me so mad thinking of that. And yet I just continue.
I can tell. Yeah.
Well, it's dumb. It's the dumbest thing ever. Like, stop Russell Wilson. By the way, the Chargers, when they couldn't stop a nosebleed against Denver on Thursday night, in all of every Bengals fan ever was watching that game and like, man, is this the Bengals defense? What was it? It was all those screens and missed tackles, and it wasn't anything. It wasn't rocket science. It was simple stuff. And so the thing this defense hasn't done at a high level this year, Jake, certainly not consistently, is the simple stuff: tackling, being in the right spot, all of those things. So all of the things that they've stunk at against the good teams, they need to do on Saturday. So that's why it's such a good prove it game, prove it time, because you can't say, oh, well, they're not playing for anything. They're playing for their season. 1, so something's on the line. 2, they've shown some flashes here. It's not like they've checked out. And so it's like, all right, well, we'll now go prove it against another team that's playing for something. It's another team that's going to want it as much or worse, shouldn't want it more than you, but it's going to want it at least as much as you. And they're well coached and well schemed up. And so I'm interested in this one. I think it's going to be a fun matchup, regardless of what happens this week around them, just to give us some answers and not have – I don't think we're going to have many caveats at 8:30 or 9 o'clock Saturday night Eastern time when we record our post-game show. I think we're going to know one way or another about this defense. Not that we don't already, right? They're flawed. But I think we're going to know, all right, the December Bengals, what are they defensively? What aren't they? Because if they are what they've showed over the past few weeks, then they'll confuse Bo Nix. Then they'll get some pressure on him. Then they'll be able to make tackles in space, and they'll be in the right position. I'm not confident that that'll be the case, but it's possible, and it's up to them to go prove it on Saturday.
And that's what they can control, right? That's all they can control. The hopes at this point are slim. I saw that the DVOA playoff forecast, which is adjusted for the expectation that the Chiefs will rest starters after beating the Steelers and clinching the 1 seed, has the Bengals down to a 1% chance at this 1%. Point to make the playoffs.
Isn't that wild?
It's a never say never thing, but it's also those games early in the season that we talked about are exactly what we thought they would be. But the Denver Broncos haven't beaten good teams very often this year. They're what, 1-6 against teams with a winning record. Not that the Bengals currently have a winning record. They wouldn't fit into that statistic right now. But all the Bengals can do is play the team in front of them on Saturday in their home finale, and that's what they can control. They can control their effort, their execution, how well they play against the Denver Broncos. Is these things will matter for their futures as well, right? Not just this season. And then as fans, you're looking at the Giants playing the Colts and hoping.
Malik Neighbors is a game time decision, by the way. So if you're like, oh, well, maybe Malik Neighbors will go crazy.
Oh, good.
And Dorian Thompson-Robinson is still the quarterback for the Cleveland Browns. So
they're playing the Dolphins. And so the amount of help the Bengals need because of name one of their 8 losses. I guess one of their 7 losses, the Philly loss, was pretty decisive. But because of those games, that's why it's 1%. But the Bengals can't control that. All they can control is the team they play on Saturday.
You know what the Bengals need? The Bengals need Kevin Stefanski to be under the impression he's coaching for his job, right? And get his guys to rally. And then they need Brian Daboll. And I don't think this is necessarily the case. This is the orange and black glasses that are on now. They need Brian Daboll to know that he's fired and to say, I want to cost the Giants the number 1 pick. I'm not saying either one is true. Stefanski may very well be safe and Brian Daboll may be safe. I have no idea. But like, that's what you need is you need like you think that you're going to get rid of me and give the number 1 pick to someone else? Fine. I'm going to cost you the number 1 pick. I don't know if it'll work, but it could.
Just looking for those bits of motivation. Gotta find the angles, you know? That's where we're at in week 17 because
it's all about angles when you're facing quick game. It's all about taking the right angles.
Yeah.
Jake.
Yeah.
Quick game.
Good way to finish the show. We'll be back with you after the game on Saturday with the takeaways as the Bengals try to keep those hopes alive, slim though they may be. Until then, thanks for listening to this episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. Hoo day, and have a good one.
Quick game.